So the first thing I wanted to take a look at was this article. It's from December 29th, and it's basically looking at the most watched television networks from the whole of 2022. Who went up, who went down, that kind of thing. And also looking at adults 18 to 49. That isn't exactly the esports demographic. Normally, you know, you're looking at like 18 to 24, 18 to 30 or whatever it is. But some of you might have already seen this because I can see you posting stuff in the chat. But winners, ESPN, Crime TV, losers, G4. So I wanted to take a look at just this and talk about this project just for a little bit because G4 has at this point closed, and this article is illuminating as to potentially why. So Comcast Spectacor, you know, actually I don't know whether it was Comcast Spectacor, but I think it was, tried to relaunch the video gamer-centric network 2 years ago, but it shut down again in October, and it's not hard to see why. G4 was the least watched of every network that Nielsen measures, averaging 1,000 people in prime time. And literally not even enough people between the ages of 18 to 49 to round up to at least 1,000. So obviously there were people watching who were 18 to 49, but it literally ranked a 0 because it didn't get over 500 people watching that were in that demographic apparently. So yeah, 1,000 viewers on TV is not really going to cut the mustard, is it? And if you look here, you know, you can, I don't know, what do you want to compare it to? I mean, you could, this is kind of interesting as well, man, by looking at like the most watched TV networks of 2022 and think about the biggest streamers you can think of, or think about like, you know, if VCT was running on a schedule that could be published on TV or something. Like each one of these is thousands, by the way. So, you know, if you start from the bottom, you've got, obviously, we've just talked about it, G4, down here at 1,000. But, you know, some of your favorite streamers will be pulling in more than, I don't know, the Discovery Family Channel. Tarek today I saw was on like 45k at least. I don't know exactly what he was up to, but, you know, he's up there with the Tennis Network, potentially. That kind of thing. Oh, he got to 60,000, did he? Oh, he was up to 80,000. Okay. So he's pulling in stuff like Charge, never heard of that before, or Great American Family. I don't know any of these networks, by the way. NBA TV up there at 90,000. But obviously these are averages too, right? So, you know, we shouldn't really be comparing Tarek's peak at the moment, but whatever. It's just for a bit of fun. The point is, G4 was in the dumps. And so you might say, well, that's unfair, just looking at their TV coverage. It's not unfair because that was the whole reason that they relaunched it, was to try and capture the audience and put it back on TV. But all right, let's have a look at Sully Gnome, shall we? So this is tracking their Twitch viewership. So this is G4's viewers between the, you know, February to February, and they closed in October. So obviously things fall off a cliff at this point. But this gray line here is the averages, and they're sat somewhere at like average. The highest average that they had was around February, where they were sat at like, oh, I guess this is just like a linear line or something that just goes down. So no, that's not really fair average. But you know that, you know, you take somewhere in the middle of this, and they're sat somewhere at like, you know, 5,000, something like that. Maybe that's being a bit too generous because there's a lot of streams down there where they're only sat at like 2,000, 3,000. But you know, it's not shocking, which does bump them up the rankings a little bit. You know, if we added that all together and we were being a linear line, yeah, shut up. You know, if we were being generous with them, they'd probably go up to somewhere about here, underneath Fuse. Anyone watch Fuse? Underneath AccuWeather. So yeah, the G4 project not really looking too good there. Bit of an L for Comcast Spectacor, and to me, it's just obvious that would be an L because esports and gaming in general is so much more specified than when G4 was a thing. Do you remember when you were like 12 and the only way to enjoy gaming content was like picking up a PlayStation magazine or something? Do you think PlayStation magazines would work if they fucking brought them back and tried to just fill them full of every game possible? No, the gaming space is just so much bigger now. People have specialized their fan base. They're not just a fan of all esports. And even if you want to compare the, like, you know, sports collection channels, if you tune into a sports coverage TV channel and it's showing you different major sports, mate, it's not going to be covering that many sports. Do you know how many fucking esports there are out there? Even if you're only talking about, you know, the tier 1 or tier 1.5 esports are still way too many to keep even like a cursory track on. So it doesn't make sense. It was a really weird project to begin with, and I don't know exactly how they thought they were going to be able to recapture that audience. That audience is gone. But yeah, that just shows you how unsuccessful it was at being able to pop off on TV. Following on from that, I wanted to showcase, so Nerd Street Gamers, this is just the announcement that Comcast was an investor in Nerd Street, so I just wanted to, you know, follow the dots there. Esports Advocate posted an article about 2 weeks ago talking about Nerd Street weighing its options, struggling financially, and I think, you know, if you're in the Valorant scene, you understood that this was happening because there was all of this popping off on Twitter about you know, Sully not getting paid and some of the players not getting paid and that kind of thing. And the Nerd Street guy coming out and just saying, yeah, we've got massive like cash flow issues and stuff like that, and we thought that we were gonna be hosting challenges for this year, and they ended up not doing it. So yeah, just essentially saying that Nerd Street has serious financial liabilities and is looking for a way to get itself out of debt. And they're looking for possible acquisition or further investment from a bunch of different places in order to get them out of the sticky situation that they find themselves in. And they've probably massively overextended themselves, overstretched themselves, assuming that they were going to be continued to be receiving money from Riot to run their ecosystem to some degree, which is not the case. But, I mean, yeah, again, Nerd Street reported to be cutting 25% of its staff, and that the company's struggling to pay off obligations from the Valorant tournaments. But, I mean, we know that because we've seen it blown up on Twitter and that kind of shit. So, yeah, not a great time there. And following the thread of Comcast into the Philadelphia Fusion, obviously a while back, if you were following the Overwatch League at all, the Comcast team, the Comcast Spectacor team, changed from the Philadelphia Fusion to the Seoul Infernal. And they decided to rebrand heading into this year, which seems a bit strange to me because, I mean, I really can't see the Overwatch League sticking around for too much longer in the, you know, with how it's going, unless Overwatch 2 goes crazy. But okay, they're gone for a rebrand. And what I thought was interesting about this is the original concept of the Overwatch League was obviously to have home territories. And when you were the Philadelphia Fusion, you owned the rights to run events, to run watch parties, to activate, basically, within an area of the world. And when the homestand model was supposed to be a thing, that made some degree of sense. And, you know, is part of the reason why you have Florida Mayhem instead of the Miami Mayhem, because the Florida Mayhem had access to, I think it was like Miami and Orlando, something like that. So they had a larger area that they could operate in compared to something. I don't know. There was a lot of talk about that at the beginning of the league because that was the premise of which the league was set up on. And now they are basically just not giving a shit about any of that. So previously, you know, if this was the idea that the Overwatch League had set up, if things operated like that, then you would expect that Comcast Spectacor would have had to actually buy the Seoul Dynasties or buy some of their rights to play in Seoul. Do you understand what I mean there? Like, Seoul Dynasty, by buying into the franchise system of the Overwatch League, actually paid for, as part of their franchise fee, the rights to activate within that space, within Seoul. And instead, you've got a couple of years down, and basically everyone's just fucking given up on all of the basis that the Overwatch League was set up on, and the league is just moving people around willy-nilly. And this wasn't something that anybody was talking about from what I could see, because this was the most interesting thing to me was, did Comcast Spectacor actually have to pay the Dynasty for some kind of rights to rebrand? And so I got in touch with people, or got in touch with a person, I should say, behind the Seoul Dynasty, and basically got an answer of, no one gives a shit about that stuff anymore. So, no. But the reason that this is somewhat relevant will become apparent later on down the road, because there's currently a legal battle about to kick off, or at least litigation and a law firm being hired to address the point that the Overwatch League has failed to deliver on its core promises. And one of these was that you're paying such a big fucking amount of money because you're paying for your territory. Also, the logo is basically just a Vancouver Titans logo, but red and gold. So I thought this was very funny. I appreciated this. Yoink. There were also, a lot of reports about the NetEase, the NetEase not renewing their license with Overwatch, causing problems for China. The Chinese servers shut down on the 23rd of January, which is like just over 3 weeks ago at this point. And that has caused absolute turmoil in terms of how the league is going to be run next year and how the Chinese teams are going to operate. The Chinese teams have all pulled out massive amounts of funding. And the LA Valiant is back. Woo. Everyone loves this team, right? Great. Awesome. I can't believe the Gladiators even tweeted something nice. If I was in charge of the Gladiators social media, I would have actually just tweeted "fuck off" back. Actually, that sounds really. I was about to say "fuck off" back to China, but I didn't mean that in the sense of like to the players. It sounds really xenophobic when you say that out loud. But what I meant was the organization should fuck off back. Because their whole move was so opportunistic and destructive to their players that they had on salary when they first decided to move to be a Chinese organization, or at least an org that was operating in China. They fucked over their players. They didn't give them very many opportunities to even join other teams. They abandoned all of their fan base. They essentially pulled out as much as they possibly could from operating at all. They didn't give any time for the Chinese organization that was picking up the slack to do anything. So they had an utterly dogshit team that wasted everybody's time and stole everybody's entertainment. It was fucking dreadful. And now they're like, haha, China doesn't work anymore in Overwatch, so we're coming crawling back. Well, you can fuck off. I don't even watch the game and this boiled my blood. Jesus Christ. Also, hilariously, Halo reported, according to sources, the Valiant Chinese GM didn't even know they were relocating back to the West. What? It's a fucking clown show over there. It's a clown show. Unbelievable. And this is the Immortals Gaming Club, by the way, that are operating this. The same people that well, not the same people, but the same parent organization that runs MIBR. But I hope to God, and so far it seems like MIBR has enough of like its own jurisdiction on how it runs things that it is not going to get sucked into the IGC clown fiesta. So it seems like MIBR is not doing too badly as an org, so I'm not expecting it to collapse, but this is pretty horrendous. Apparently the Toronto Defiance tweet is fucking funny. What is this? I'm trying to open it because I can't tab out right now. What am I looking at here? So Toronto... Alright, so... Oops, not those quote tweets. These quote tweets. 117 quote tweets. Where's the one by the Toronto Defiant? I mean, there's going to be some dreadful stuff in here. Probably shouldn't be scrolling through here, should I? But Toronto Defiant, come on. Come on. Oh, there it is. Competing. In quotes. I mean, shocking. Absolutely shocking. Shocking. Yeah. So part of the reason that this is that you know, the LA Valiant are moving is probably also because again, Esports Advocate reporting here that the Overwatch League 2023 season won't be broadcast in China. So I did a whole video previously talking about how massive the Chinese viewership is for the Overwatch League, that it is essentially floated and propped up in terms of viewership numbers, not necessarily in terms of revenue and sponsorship, but in terms of viewership numbers and global relevancy. China viewership has propped up the league massively ever since 2020, when things started being played more in their time zone. And this is coming from sources close to NetEase, because I'm sure they're happy to leak fucking everything now that they're just a spurned lover. They've told the Esports Advocate that the Overwatch League will not be broadcast in China due to the termination of the partnership between NetEase and Activision Blizzard. What's hilarious about this is, while competitions related to unapproved games are not allowed to be broadcast on Chinese live streaming platforms officially, some events, like the PUBG Championship, still get away with it. The government turns a blind eye to it. But because Activision Blizzard's exit was high profile, the Chinese government is likely to strictly enforce the policy for any related competitions. So just they're getting the dickhead treatment. They're just getting the dickhead treatment for making such a massive piss up of it all. So what's hilarious about this, though, is that the Chinese Overwatch League teams, one of them is owned by NetEase, who now don't have an agreement with the Overwatch League. So that's absurd. And one of them, the Hangzhou Spark, is owned by Bilibili, who are a broadcast partner. And now the game can't be broadcast on Bilibili. Just brain-melting levels of fuck-ups. Brain-melting levels of fuck-ups from the top. And obviously, the Overwatch NetEase, and more so than that, the Blizzard NetEase problem is nothing really to do with Overwatch League. The people involved in Overwatch League can't influence that. The people involved in those discussions between Activision Blizzard and NetEase probably didn't even think about Overwatch League. But this is the unfortunate consequence of these companies not being able to resolve what's going on. And by the sound of it, a lot of the blame being with Activision Blizzard, because NetEase seem pissed about this. So, you know, Overwatch League are just kind of saddled with this horrible situation because, as always, ever since 2019 or maybe 2020, the Overwatch League has actually been making pretty decent decisions, and they're just always trying to dig themselves out from the utter pile of shit being dumped on them from executives higher up in Activision Blizzard. Just buckets of shit raining down from the Activision Blizzard ivory towers, all splattering on the Overwatch League, which was built on shaky ground to begin with, let's be real, and they're barely being able to bail it out. So on top of the, let's talk about this first, actually. So the Overwatch League teams, Jacob Wolf reported on January 18th that the Overwatch League teams have started a collective bargaining process against the league, seeking forms of economic relief, so basically asking for money, because the league promised or suggested or whatever that they would be getting much more revenue, and also the basis that the league was founded on has just completely disappeared. So I am actually subscribed to the Jacob Wolf report. This one's a free article, but would highly recommend subscribing to Jacob Wolf's Substack, of which I am a member. I'm just not signed in at the moment. Anyway, the Overwatch League teams have retained a British law firm, Sheridan's, in order to start a collective bargaining process against the league, and the goal is to be awarded some form of economic relief after each franchise spent somewhere between 7.5 to 10 million in franchise payments over the past 6 years, as well as more than 1 million in operating costs each year to maintain their teams. Apparently the Chinese organizations are not really involved in this. This is mostly the Western organizations, and it's been started by Overactive Media, the people behind the Toronto Defiant. So I would imagine it's most of the people in the Western Conference kind of thing. It says specifically here, tensions are high as teams evaluate how they will spend prior to the 2023 season. And while there isn't a shit ton of detail here, I do also want to... let's read through this still a little further. Many of the teams got PPE loans from the US, and Activision Blizzard deferred the remaining balance after 2020 of the franchise payments. So just going back to a previous article that was written by Jacob Wolf, this was an article saying that Activision Blizzard is still owed about 400 million in franchise payments from teams participating in OWL and Call of Duty. And, you know, the payments were deferred in 2020 due to COVID relief measures. And also, they leveled out the franchise pricing for the 12 inaugural teams and the 8 expansion teams. So the new total franchise price was roughly 16 million. In this article as well, it mentions that Activision Blizzard head of esports Brandon Snow proposed waiving all outstanding franchise payments during his time at the company, but he's since left Activision Blizzard and they didn't decide to do that. But somebody really high up, the head of esports, did at one point propose, why are we even getting these franchise payments when the orgs are fucking dying left, right, and center, and we're rolling in our dragon hoard of money from printing skins left, right, and center? Like, does it really make sense to be greedy here when we're just absolutely slaughtering the teams that have agreed to be our partners? But they never decided to do that. So hopping back to this original article. So, you know, they've reduced the balance on the franchise payments down to 16 million. And each team still owes somewhere between 6 and 7 million. So when you're reading this article and hearing that they want some form of economic relief, you also have to understand that they haven't actually paid these massive amounts of money up front. They were scheduled to pay the franchise payments over time, and even a lot of those scheduled payments have been deferred or even reduced. But they're looking for further economic relief. And I think the basis of this is that the league just isn't running in the way that they were told it would be running when they signed up, when they agreed to pay this massive amount of money. So Jacob cites some important context here as well. The COO of the Houston Outlaws parent company was saying that it pays some players more than $200K in salary, and they have 1.4 million in revenues, but the team is still operating at a loss. Revenue share from the league is also at an all-time low, as the league displays 0 sponsors on its website. At the time that this was written, January 18th, I think the league has 0 sponsors on the website, but has like something in place with at least Butterfingers, because they came on board later. But who knows how much that was actually for, because the league must be desperate for sponsors at this point. So it doesn't necessarily mean it was anything major. And hasn't signed a media rights deal since the expiration of the deal with YouTube. And it lost a lot of its sponsors, obviously. So when you look at the Ben Spoont quote here, they pitched us that the growth of these leagues would be meteoric. I think you're foolish for believing that. And we all drank the Kool-Aid. What has happened is that growth has not materialized as fast as we hoped. That's not a basis, though, for, legal action. But I would assume that it's based on something that this article talks about from SBJ, Sports Business Journal, where the new system is just so different to what was proposed at the beginning. So this article is from Sports Business Journal saying, Overwatch League owners think the new system could hurt business. So this is a really recent article, only from about 4 days ago, where the proposed new system for the Overwatch League is complex. So I'm not going to go through it all. I don't understand it all, frankly, but it's actually quite cool from a viewer's perspective. It's going to allow, in the East, teams from Korean contenders and from, I think, Australian contenders as well, to play in a tournament where they get the chance to compete against the Overwatch League teams. It's kind of fucking awesome, and it's something that I think they should have done and baked into how the league ran right from 2018. But they didn't. They always said that it was exclusive, that the Overwatch League teams would have those spots and you wouldn't be able to get in from the outside, right? It was a franchise system. It was super locked down, and that's what you paid for. And so while I think this system is actually better, the teams are obviously pissed off because they paid for the other system that was potentially worth more. So what they're saying here is that owners are unhappy again after the format changes were announced on Wednesday. They include a more open ecosystem, which I like, and I think the viewers will like as well, but it has left some owners wondering if they've just seen the value of their organizations take a hit. So here's where it explains some of how things work, but basically, the Eastern region is permitting non-OWL teams to compete for a chance to qualify and participate in Overwatch League play. And basically, the context of this being that while they promised something different to now what they're delivering, and they charged for something different compared to now what they're delivering. Owners are concerned that other organizations will now be able to take prize money, sponsorship opportunities, and even players away from OWL teams. I don't think many of those... I think prize money is quite likely. I don't think anyone's going to be sponsoring contenders teams that don't have as much... don't have longevity within the Overwatch League, particularly. I don't think you're competing for those guys, against those guys. And I don't think that any players are going to go to the fucking, open teams either. But in terms of prize money, okay, they probably have a point there. But this is the wild sentence here. Read this one, chat. This change has many owners up in arms, as sources tell the Sports Business Journal that these changes were not voted on by the organizations. Remember that the way that the Overwatch League works is not the same as the way that Riot's Valorant model works. With Riot's Valorant model, Riot owns the spots. Riot can make the decisions about stuff like this. Overwatch League teams own the spots. They are partnered. They have a massive stake in the Overwatch League. And part of that is that they're supposed to be consulted on changes like this. And the second part of the sentence, while the league solicited feedback from some owners, sources also tell Sports Business Journal that the league made these changes unilaterally. Woo boy. Okay then. The latest development for Overwatch League comes in the wake of some team owners retaining Sheridans to examine legal options with regard to the league. So, yeah, the teams did not vote on the change in format, which seems to be a bad idea. So, on the... what was I going to say? There was another thing that I wanted to point out as well. There's the other thing too. Yeah. Richard Lewis had a video where he was talking about some of this kind of stuff too. And he pointed out something that I think is really important, is that when people were talking and criticizing the Overwatch League when it was first built, they made a lot of really valid points. If you can put your brain back in that position, Nate Nanzer was literally trying to tell people that it was going to be the next NFL. And he had a quote something like, "I won't be happy until each of our players is driving a sports car with a hot model on their arm." Something like that. It was like, even when I was trying to get a job in the Overwatch League, I was reading that shit going, oh, this is horrendous. This is so terrible. So terrible. And by the way, Nate Nanzer just conveniently bounced as soon as the proposed Homestead model was anywhere near being implemented. Just actually the classic, I will sell you this and then disappear, bye. Like, actually fucking bounced. That was all Kotick driven though, right? I believe Nate was the person that first came up with the entire idea of the Overwatch League and pitched it to the higher ups, like Bobby Kotick. I'm pretty sure if you go back and listen to some of the interviews and stuff like that, it was like, yeah, I think Nate has some interviews where he talks about the fact that it was his idea and he pitched it to the higher ups. So also, right, so you have all of this delusion around how big the Overwatch League is actually going to be, and the things that they, the price of the slots and everything is just absurd. But the game is cool, and the game is fairly popular, and so it's still going to be a decent, league. It's just not going to be what they sold it to be. And a lot of people who were involved in esports at the time, the older people that had seen things come and go, like the CGS, for example, were talking about how dangerous this was because sponsors and investors were going to get burned, and they were going to be really pissed off and angry. And then they were going to not want to invest in other esports because they might get burnt in the same kind of way. And I think that Overwatch League actually coincided with a lot of esports investors thinking about things in a very different way, where it is much more of like a venture capital system where, people are just throwing money in, hoping that they land on something that's eventually going to get big. And if one of them's a miss, it doesn't matter because you didn't invest every penny you have. You're not pulling cash out from underneath your mattress and going all in on it. It's just one of a variety of venture capital projects that you think have a chance of doing something. And you're trying to get in very early on before things get a lot bigger. And you understand that there's a lot of risk in it, right? But definitely the team owners and investors are currently pissed off with how the Overwatch League is finished. But I don't think that has necessarily soured them to other things, because you're still seeing them invest in stuff like the Valorant model, right? So I don't think that aspect of it has really happened. And also I don't think that the sponsors that Overwatch League got have that much crossover with the rest of the space. And I think that most of the sponsor being pissed off stuff would be from Activision Blizzard, having massive discrimination and sexual harassment lawsuits, more so than anything that Overwatch League did. So I think that aspect of the criticism hasn't really played out. But something that Richard Lewis brought up that I think is really important is the biggest thing that Overwatch League has kind of fucked is the media rights deals in the space for gaming. And media rights deals are massively important for any kind of franchise system or partnership system. It's where the majority of the money comes from for traditional sports models like that. And after the Twitch deal, where it was like 90 million plus some stretch goals, and Twitch called it one of the worst deals that they've ever done. After that, I think that definitely was a turning point in terms of Twitch's thought process. And after the YouTube deal, there is no sign that there's going to be a renewal there either. And YouTube gaming is actually picking up streamers that offer way better returns if you're trying to break into this space compared to any kind of media rights thing. Now, it doesn't really look like Valorant is going down a media rights system necessarily, so much as trying to leverage their massive sales team to directly sell against the product. But from talking to people involved with those kind of conversations at Riot, and I'm sure this isn't just specific to Riot, it's just that, that's what I'm familiar with. The kind of like talks that you could have with a company about media rights deals, they are massively undervaluing esports viewership compared to traditional viewership, and to the point where it's not, it just doesn't really work as an idea, pitching yourself to things like Twitch or YouTube or other things like that. So I really do think that it seems likely that Overwatch League has done some serious damage to the concept of media rights deals in the space. And I think part of it is also that the the there was the problem is that the media rights deals are only useful if you have somewhere else that you can go, right? Like if the Overwatch League is fine, if the Overwatch League viewership is actually valuable, then people will watch the Overwatch League in a different place. But if people don't follow you from platform to platform, as they didn't really do from Twitch to YouTube, then that indicates that the deal is not really worth very much. Because if you buy the rights to the product, people are not going to follow the product. It's more so that it's convenient for them to watch because it happens to be on Twitch. Do you see what I mean? If YouTube, for example, buys the Overwatch League, but people don't come to YouTube, what have they fucking bought? They've bought a sliver of the value that they thought that they were buying. And so I think one of the other things that Overwatch League has showcased that other people hadn't really done, because Overwatch League was one of the first people to try and do that kind of thing, is that jumping platforms, even with something where your fans are quite invested, you actually can't pull them along with you very well in the gaming space, which again devalues media rights deals. Ninja to Mixer. Yeah, I mean, I actually don't know what the viewership was like with Ninja to Mixer. But yeah, CDL viewership, for example, has massively increased coming back to Twitch. People just are on Twitch, and that's very different, right? Because when you turn on a TV, it's very simple for you to just swap channel, you know? If the Great British Bake Off changes from BBC to Channel 4, or the other way around, I can't remember exactly what it was, but whatever. You know, when the Great British Bake Off decides to change what channel it's on, people will follow that because they care more about watching the show than they do about what channel they happen to be on. Who gives a fuck what channel they're on? But with gaming, the opposite trend is observed. And I don't think that the Overwatch League has actively caused this to be a problem, but they've certainly demonstrated it and provided evidence for it. And Activision Blizzard in general have provided evidence for it with that and the CDL. So yeah, that's another little interesting thing. So pivoting anyway, the other part that I wanted to discuss is this one. So Bodork put out a tweet saying that the Challengers Taiwanese Hong Kong rules were updated recently, and in it they've confirmed that China will be a separate region in Valorant, increasing the likelihood of a Chinese league. As reported previously, there are current plans to make a league for Chinese Valorant, and so they've specifically stated this as well. And then there was another report, and this one was actually from Bloomberg, but it was behind a paywall on Bloomberg, and it wasn't on Yahoo Finance. I don't know how that works, but the title of the article is Tencent Plans a Valorant League as Gaming Crackdown Eases. So if you're not familiar, the Chinese gaming and tech crackdowns have relaxed quite a lot recently. Possibly, although I'm not an expert, it seems like it was in response to people getting incredibly pissed off and massive protests happening due to the zero COVID policy, or COVID zero policy, where they just had unbelievably draconian measures in place. And we could go down that path as well, where they just decided to get rid of all of their policies in one go, and now tons of people are dying. But I don't think that's necessarily relevant for this conversation. What's more relevant is that it seems like they threw a bit of, bread and circus stuff in there to make people a little more happy after there was some pretty large-scale protesting happening that was uncomfortable for the Chinese government to deal with. So anyway, Tencent is one of the beneficiaries of that, and they've said here they're planning to launch a Valorant esports league when it debuts in China this year, when Valorant debuts in China. And TJ Sports has apparently held discussions with top Chinese esports players in recent days about setting up the competition. That's interesting. Presumably those top Chinese esports players, it doesn't say Valorant players, but if they are Valorant players, because that would make sense, presumably they're here at Lock-In as well. You know, I mean, who would you talk to if not EDG and FPX? I guess there are some other decent teams, but, you know, like K1 or something like that. But it could kick off a tournament over the summer at the earliest. That is incredibly early to me. So this timescale is insanely early for a full-on Chinese team happening, because that would put them in position where they could like run an LCQ and, you know, or maybe they run a split instead of an LCQ or something, and there's actually some like, you know, games happening, some teams announced, that kind of shit heading into champs at the end of the year. They probably would have just invited a couple of Chinese teams to champions anyway, as they've done with Lock-In, even if this timescale wasn't as quick as it was. But this is really speedy, and the fact that there were 2 Chinese teams invited to Lock-In, and there are plans in place already for a Chinese tournament, indicates to me that Riot were pretty well aware ahead of time that they were going to get authorization for the game. They must have known to some degree the timescale involved, I think, at least with a few months' notice, because they've clearly put plans in place and got the ball rolling to some degree. So talks are still in their initial stages. Tencent could push back the timeline, but a Valorant League will help reboot competitive online gaming in China after a 2-year lull. And then the rest of the article is basically about how gaming is getting back on its feet in China, etc., etc. But yeah, basically the rest of it is just talking about Chinese tech and gaming getting back on its feet. But all in all, Overwatch League having massive L's for the Chinese region at the same time as Valorant is getting some big W's for China. And I don't necessarily know that that's going to feed one into the other, but I can't help but think that there might be some effect. I mean, if you can't play any Activision Blizzard games in China, apart from one, right? There was some game, like, was it Diablo? Was it Diablo Immortal or something? Some mobile game. I can't remember exactly what it was, that you could still play as part of their agreement. But I've got to imagine that with significantly, massively less people in China playing Activision Blizzard games, that they go elsewhere. And while there are a lot of other alternatives, I can imagine that would lead to an increase in Riot volume of players.